There's this wave of technology that's sweeping through, have a massive impact on financial services. All aspects of financial services are going to be impacted by large language models, and compliance is no exception. What's interesting about compliance in this particular case is that because it is so much about language, it's about the translation of legislation and laws into regulations, and then from regulations, an interpretation of that in terms of what it means to a bank, into actual policies, procedures, and rules, and risk and controls, and testing, and all other aspects of the operations of the bank, is that those that specific use of language and the translation is something that large language models are very, very good at doing. And that makes it a great place to start with large language models within banking itself. And you also look at the challenges that compliance managers are dealing with today, and a lot of them have to do with communication. How are you going to effectively communicate with all different parts of your organization? If you've got 10,000 employees, how are you going to speak to each one of those employees? How are you going to give them the tools that they need to effectively ask you questions? How are you going to tell them what you expect them to do? How are you going to review all of the documents they're generating, all the communications that's coming out of marketing, all of the scripts coming out of your call centers and out of your sales process? How do you do all of that? And the answer is today is you can't. You can't do it using existing tools and capabilities. But the large language models, particularly if they're developed the right way, and they are smart about your bank's knowledge, how you interpret rules and regs, how you interpret legislation, and it does so in a way that enables you to do your job better, then it can act as a force multiplier and really enable the everyday compliance officer to be a force of 10, 15, 20 people and reach, from a communication standpoint, into all aspects of the bank. So if marketing has a question as to whether or not a specific press release or a bit of language on an ad, is going to pass muster, they can pass it through, your customized large language model configuration and get an answer back instantaneously. Cuts back on their cycles. You probably have a lot of situations as a compliance officer where you're rapping people's knuckles for saying the wrong thing. This enables them to self-correct, and it provides like the feedback loop so that they know when they're on track and when they're not on track, and that enables them to be more self-sufficient, to be better at getting their own jobs done, and doing so within the guardrails that you've established for the organization. On the other side of that is, in terms of how you define those guardrails, regulation change is constant. It's always happening. And it's even exploding now that the states are taking more control on that, within the rules and regs you need to follow. Privacy regulations are a good example. Marijuana financing rules are a good example, where all of a sudden you have to not just know what the federal regulators are asking for, but what's happening at each state level. And it changes radically depending on where you're operating. And with that level of change that's happening, if you can automatically and instantaneously understand what the implication is to all of your policy documents. So as an example, if a federal rule changes, and you can look and say, tell me which policy documents are impacted, you can instantaneously know what needs to happen. And then if the next thing you say is, can you rewrite my policy documents within the context of this new regulation or this change regulation, and that can happen instantaneously and get you 85-95% of the way done to that process, then all you need to do is take your very valuable expertise, make the final tweaks, and you have now saved yourselves weeks and maybe more of effort. So all of those things make it really possible for large language models to be impactful to compliance. And then coupling that with the risk that a new technology presents and the way that risk is perceived by regulators, compliance is a very good fit. You're not going to be creating large language models that are interacting on to help customers open bank accounts or take out loans anytime soon, because the regulators aren't going to let you do it. They're not good enough yet. They're not tuned well enough yet in order to make that happen. Compliance is a naturally internal function, and you're going to be able to effectively communicate within your organization, control what goes outside of it, and even inspect and look at every single piece of communication that leaves the bank's leaves the bank's control, and do so in a way that doesn't require new people, new resources, new money, and instead can help you achieve your objectives without falling into any kind of issue with outside regulators.